Hey, there was a piece in the New York Times on Sunday which produced revelations about a last minute, if I'll just use it as a phrase, I mean, it wasn't literally the last minute, a commutation for a drug smuggler named Jonathan Braun. And it was of significance, and this piece pointed out its significance because it derailed a Justice Department investigation and case that was underway. Could you speak to this, please?
Yeah, at the time Trump was leaving office, he gave a whole number of commutations, clemency, and pardons that were not run through the Justice Department office, which vets these things. Now, early in the days of our republic, there were lots of pardons given by presidents, and frankly, I think there should be a lot more pardons granted by presidents than there are. But they also need to be done, I think, with some kind of a process. The implication of this story, and Tom Hartman didn't beat around the bush in his piece today, he just stepped up to the ball and hit it, is that Trump was selling pardons, selling commutation, selling clemency. In fact, the word back when Trump left office was took $2 million to get yourself a pardon. And in this case, the Times documents very carefully the remarkably close relationship between the fellow who got clemency and Jared Kushner's family. By the way, Jared Kushner's father, a felon convicted in a particularly nasty case, was among those who got last-minute pardons. And how this fellow and his wife just happened to be at a Trump property when Donald was there to get their picture taken after this benefit. You may recall that about 30 years ago, the outgoing governor of Tennessee was selling pardons, and he went to prison. And if Trump was selling pardons, well, the president's power to pardon is virtually absolute. It's not absolute because you can't do an official act for money. That's a crime. The pardon may or may not stand if it were challenged. And I think it's absolutely obligatory for the Justice Department to investigate. They only have a limited amount of time before the statute of limitations would run out. That would be essentially December of 2025. But I think that this is a terrible story. And in this case, the guy who got out was a key person the Justice Department was trying to leverage to deal with a whole bunch of other criminals. And instead, the leverage went away, and he's now out, it appears. He hasn't been charged with anything, but it appears he's out doing the same thing he did before, committing more crimes. A standard demand for pardons is that you serve your sentence, you spend at least 5 years out on the streets where you behave, and you show remorse. Now, that standard shouldn't apply in cases of actual innocence, but there's no actual innocence claim here, and there wouldn't be. And so he got extraordinary treatment. His sentence got cut really short, and he went right back, it appears, to the same kind of crimes, and he's never expressed any remorse. You want to break down the rule of law. You want to live in a society like Honduras. And this is exactly how you get there with things like this.
They were trying to extract essentially a flip from him, right, David? As you suggest, it was a much bigger crime ring. And by the way, yeah, he was a massive drug dealer, but he also was involved, I think, in predatory lending, and he had violence. This guy was threatening violence a lot of the time. Go ahead.
He moved over from drugs to predatory lending and threatened people who didn't pay him. I mean, he's a loan shark. He's a bad guy. I mean, there's no two ways about it, although he hasn't been charged with a crime. But I think that we should be concerned more with Trump and Jared Kushner and monetizing, that is, taking, in essence, payoffs to arrange pardons and commutations.
Among those threatened, just to give people a sense of this and we can move on, but among those threatened was a real estate developer who said Mr. Braun told him, "I will take your daughters from you." This is all in court documents. Another borrower said in an affidavit that Mr. Braun told him, "Be thankful you're not in New York because your family would find you floating in the Hudson." I mean, this is the kind of guy who, again, got this commutation.
Yeah,
So
when I hear people say, well, there's no investigative in the New York Times, reporting in the New York Times, it's just all opinions, I know they don't read it. And I also know from, almost 6 decades of doing this, that this was a very, very difficult story to report that required enormous skill and diligence to fit together completely disconnected pieces in the public record. An extraordinarily skillfully done story. And, those pieces keep appearing in the New York Times every week or so. I mean, big projects that are very expensive and require enormous skill. And very few other news organizations have the money or the talent, or perhaps most important of all, the backbone to do things like this anymore.
Such a good point. And I think implied in that point is the connect the dots that you have to do. And there are a lot of dots here, and these are tough connections. And you're right. You have to go through court testimony. You have to track down sources. And then now, just to return to the story and what you had mentioned, this was a huge criminal investigation going on with this guy at the center of it. And you got the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, and they're trying to build this wide-ranging criminal case focused on predatory lending. And essentially, by commuting this guy's sentence, which was done at the last minute, again, because of the Kushner connections, etc., as you just noted, it derailed all of that. And it's because the Trump people were operating independent of the Justice Department, is what you're saying.
Essentially the Trump-Kushner crime family doing a favor for another crime family. And the fellow who was the direct beneficiary went to this dubious school funded by the Kushner family in New Jersey. I and other people have written about its provenance and its things that have gone on there. And there's very good reason to think there were other connections going on with Jared Kushner and his father, Charles. So yeah, this should worry us a great deal. And I mentioned on your show before that there are national security crimes Donald Trump committed that we will never hear about. Now, I don't factually can't prove you that, but the obvious basis for that is we often do not pursue national security cases because it would disclose sources and methods or otherwise compromise our safety. And given that we know that Trump told this Australian billionaire, in a way, someone who was in line to perhaps profit off of a government contract, some of the most closely guarded secrets our government has, it would be naive to think that's the only time Donald Trump spoke to somebody. Donald doesn't have any mufflers on his mouth. He doesn't have any sense of principle that, oh, that's a national security secret. I can't tell anybody that, even if I want to scream it at the top of my lungs. It's my duty to shut my mouth. And the contrast I would draw is, you'll recall the night of the gridiron dinner, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, something I would never go to, that President Obama was calm as a lamb on a summer's morn, made a joke about the enormous pressures Donald Trump must be facing, like whether to fire Meatloaf. And at that very time, they were deciding whether to go or delay getting Osama bin Laden. Obama is somebody who understands the necessity to keep secrets and preserve them. If Donald had been in that situation, I could see him walking out and saying, well, right now I've got Marines going in to get Osama bin Laden. They're going to be there in 25 minutes. I mean, it's entirely.
Yeah, he can't keep a lid on it. And here are the documents to prove it. He would wave them. Let me get to the January 6th court case, this D.C. Circuit Court ruling. This ties Donald Trump to the January 6th violence. This thing's been going on a while, David. It's coming up on its 1-year anniversary, I believe. And I'm just wondering what's going on. I mean, I get that The guy's been allowed to skate on some stuff, and there's a case in Colorado. Kim was reporting on it earlier. This court case, which sort of in which his lawyer is suggesting, my client Donald Trump didn't actually take an oath to defend the Constitution or whatever. I mean, he was playing word games with it. But on this one, you'd think there would be a ruling in 1 year's time. Can you speak to this bid to hold Trump accountable for the January 6th violence and where that sits?
Well, I think the judge in the Colorado case who said there's no question Donald Trump launched an insurrection, at the same time just didn't have the backbone to carry that through and adopted this cockamamie argument that Trump is not an officer and didn't take an oath to the Constitution. Both Michael Luttig, a very conservative federal judge who is one of the most respected by people on the right, the Federalist Society people, treat him as one of the really greats of our era. And Lawrence Tribe, the Harvard law professor, who is, even Luttig would, I think, agree, the most distinguished constitutional law scholar in any law school in America, are in absolute agreement that the judge should have then kept Trump off the ballot. Judges are not people generally who want to, break new ground. However, it's just not the nature of people who get appointed to the bench. And all of this is going slowly because, when you know how to gum up the works, and Donald Trump has spent a lifetime getting lawyers who are specialists at that, you can delay, and delay. And that's always been Donald's game from day one. It was taught to him by the notorious Roy Cohn.
Sure. I think, and I was just going to say, John, David Cay Johnston, the reality is that him entering the race as he did so early was actually an effective move to blunt the legal process a bit.
Yeah, I don't buy this notion that judges need to take some account of the fact that he's running for president. He's a private citizen. First of all, about 400 people file with the Federal Election Commission each election to run for president. At least the last time I looked, which admittedly was 20 years ago, there were more than 400 people. And that, so what? It has nothing to do with your criminal case. So I'm very troubled about this. What we're going to learn a lot in the next week here, because there are two gag orders, very limited, very tightly controlled gag orders. And yesterday or the day before, Jack Smith's office put into the public record examples of the threats that are being made. Not only are we going to kill you, we're going to torture you, we're going to do all sorts of horrible things to you. And Donald's response to that is, well, I didn't say that. I mean, I didn't tell people to say that. They said it. I mean, I have no responsibility here. That's nonsense. You shout fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire, you're responsible. And it's very troubling that the courts are being so cautious about this when I don't think there's any reason to be cautious. If Donald Trump were a poor criminal defendant, even in California or Massachusetts, you don't have to go to Mississippi for this, and said the things he said, he'd be sitting in jail. He would be remanded. When you are out on bail, there are conditions on your being out, because a judge could remand you prior to trial, and you violate those conditions, there should be serious sanctions on you, including, and I think at this point, frankly, it would be entirely appropriate for a judge to tell Donald Trump, you're going to sit in a jail cell until the trial.
That's just unreal. But I mean, you see how we're so not used to this as a country and as a system.
Thank God we're not used to it. We shouldn't be used to it. This should be an anomaly in history.
I mean, but, much of what we've talked about, David, just in these few minutes that we visited today, it just hits me. We elected a celebrity criminal, a celebrity mobster,
Yeah.
and if you read your books, the dude totally operates like a mobster in every way, including the Michael Cohn being the guy who goes and sweats and threatens and, extracts concessions from people who Trump is on.
The real difference between Donald and the mafia is that Donald is a white collar mobster. He steals with a pen, with uncompleted lies, with contracts, with threats of ruining you in litigation, which I've heard from him more times than I can remember. And most people back off about that. I know you want to talk about Nikki Haley. I just want you to keep a minute at the end so I can mention something else.
Okay, cool. I do want to get to Nikki Haley because, and let me just say that there are those who, before we leave Trump completely, there are those who are depending on this D.C. Circuit Court ruling that we were just talking about, it being delayed now a year, because there are cases going through the courts that are related to the criminality of Donald Trump, and also, there are lawsuits, there are civil suits related to damages from January 6th. I mean, the law enforcement officers who suffered physical damage as a result of what happened.
It
So
was
all of that depends
a
on
tourist
it.
visit. It's just a tourist visit.
Yeah, just the tourist visit. All right, now to Nikki Haley, and here's why I think Nikki Haley. I was mentioning this at the beginning of the show. Makes news today anyway. It's Koch brothers money. It's institutional money. And David, by contrast, I mean, he's done well with the money raise, Donald Trump has, but that is not institutional like Koch brothers big GOP money. He's got all the small donor money. It's wild how his populism continues to endure. So Haley is getting the real movement of big money, but the real movement of small money and voters still seems to be in Trump's corner.
The fundamental question we should be asking ourselves is, how did we end up with a campaign finance system where big money decides who's going to be on the ballot and who's going to be a candidate instead of popular support? Here, I'll give Trump a win. He's got lots of people sending him $5 and $10. Being a supposed multi-billionaire, I don't know why he needs money, but the Koch brothers and their like have decided that Nikki Haley is their best hope. Makes sense because they don't want Trump. They recognize that Trump is very bad for business. He's not good for the libertarian ideals of the surviving of the two major Koch brothers. And so they want somebody else. But Nikki Haley, from a Christian family, is not acceptable to a lot of evangelicals because she is ethnically an Indian, from India, the country of India. And I have a very hard time seeing the prospect that they would swing to her in a mass popular movement. But she certainly would be a better choice than Trump. And while I don't particularly care for her politics, she was a reasonably competent manager. And the job of president is being a manager. Biden is proving to be an exquisitely talented manager because he knows how Washington works, even though the press corps does a terrible job of laying out the smart things he's done. But the Haley is, she's competent enough. I just don't see the evangelical.
You don't see her viable politically. That
may change. It's been time. We had a long time to go before we get to the election.
Sure. And last thing I'll say, I mentioned at the top of the show, if you can go back and watch it, anybody who's just joined us now, Haley's position on Social Security, her position on taxation, it's straight right wing out of the book. So, I mean, now with our last few minutes, David, go ahead. What did you want to touch on?
Well, two things if people might get a little amusement out of by going to my Twitter feed, David Cayj. Yesterday, I posted a little sign from somebody. I don't know who created it. It was, why can I only buy one Sudafed at the drugstore, but an 18-year-old can go buy an assault rifle and 300 rounds of ammunition, or words to that effect.
Right.
Knowing this would set off the Second Amendment absolutist crowd who forget the first words of that amendment, a well-regulated militia. And sure enough, it did. And the very first person to post was a guy whose description says he's an investigator, and he made a factual error. I mean, a really significant factual error. And I called him on it. And now there are more than 4,000 responses from people who keep saying, you didn't make any error at all. And this goes to the inability of zealots to look beyond their bias. When bigots have an idea in their head, they cannot see beyond it. The error I pointed out to a number of people, it should take you 1 minute of research to find what it is. And almost nobody has found. In fact, a couple of people said, I know what it is, and sort of hinted at it without saying it. But all sorts of people are, you're just crazy, you're a liar, et cetera, et cetera. This is what we get from zealots. It's why it matters that more than half of American adults read at the level of a 12-year-old or below. And it should deeply concern us. The other is that 2 or 3 days ago, I put up a little quiz on Twitter. When a star creates iron, that is most like creates lead, I wrote. That is most like what in biology? And I gave 4 possible answers: breathing, pregnancy, metastasis, and defecation. Now, I deliberately put an error in the question to see how many people would catch it. Stars don't create lead, they create iron. That's the highest one they can create. How do we get lead? Well, I explained that. There's an 18-part rollout by me today explaining the answers.
There it is. We have it up now. Go ahead. Yeah.
And it was designed to be a little fun, to see how much people know about physics, about our universe. It's very clear from the answers that a lot of people don't, especially the fact that the vast majority of people did not recognize the intentional error I put in the question. And I point out there's a lesson there. Never assume a question is based on something, the premise of it is something solid, or as we investigative reporters say, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. I hope some people go there and have a little fun, and
that's great.
And you can figure out the mistake in this guy's thing if you just stop and don't be a zealot about anything. Just read it and say, okay, it's one sentence. How could he have made an error in this one sentence? What was it? I knew you figured out, Mark. So
that's terrific, David. I like it. And I like that every tweet isn't and every post isn't so arch, but people respond to it as though it is. You know what I mean? They just, you especially, because you've become something of a firebrand. So they really maul you on stuff. It's really, and then when you engage, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll tweet a little later about the Second Amendment, or I'll write a piece maybe, what the Second Amendment absolutists miss. They just assume, well, here are these words. They don't know their context. They don't know their history. And they miss something. No right is absolute. The Supreme Court has held that again and again and again. You have a First Amendment right to free speech, but if you know where troops are going to move in the next hour and you announce that publicly, no, you don't have the right to do that. You can be punished for it. We may not be able to stop you, but we can punish you for that, and we should.
The absolutists about the Constitution are like the absolutists about the Bible. They grab what they want and twist oftentimes.
Wasn't it kind of all those dinosaurs on the ark to not
Thank you.
for 40 days and then wait until the rabbits and the other animals had propagated new populations before they ate again?
Oh, so great. I love the...
when they raided Mar-a-Lago, God didn't like that.
All right. David, you're a dream. Thank you. We look forward to next week. David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.